Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Silicon Insider podcast. I'm Mike Malone, and this is Scott Budman from NBC Bay Area. Hi, Scott. How are
Hi,
you?
Mike.
So, let's get rid of the little stuff. There's some, interesting bits of news. One of them is Tesla. Um, the headline was Elon finds himself, with stuck between two hard places. Basically, he committed himself early on that all Teslas would be allowed to have autonomous driving. Now he's got to make good on that, and he's going to have to replace computers like in your Tesla. Is that how if I read it properly? And that's going to be a very expensive proposition.
Yeah, and it's not even mine. Mine's 8 years old, so it's pre any of this, but he's talking about the version three, essentially, of the hardware software that is, the autonomous driving. And he admitted, as you and I speak, it's Thursday night, 24 hours ago, or a little more than 24 hours ago, during the earnings call on Wednesday, Musk had to admit that the current, I don't know, stack isn't going to be enough for full self-driving. And I don't know exactly what that means. He's talking about discounts if you want to replace things and hardware replacements. He's talking about cars in the Model S and X that aren't even made anymore. So if you own one of those, that was actually my story today and tonight, was somebody who's filing suit because he paid all this extra money for full self-driving and has not had full self-driving. And he's seeking class action status. This is getting interesting in terms of Elon Musk finally being held to account for promises he's made for years.
It's going to be interesting how much they estimate it's going to cost if he had to retrofit all of them and basically call them all in to do that, because that's not a software upgrade.
No, and it really depends on how deep you're willing to go in the Reddit groups for these to find out how much it might cost. But people are angry. They feel betrayed. You and I have talked about this before, that Tesla owners who so much as need a fender replaced say they've waited months and months. There has been a lot of letdown. And this for a company that still maintains a value well over $1 trillion because of the cars it sells. And yet it's disappointing a lot of people. And I honestly don't know where it goes. But this idea that so much hardware has to be replaced, even at a time when some of these cars are no longer being made, I just don't know how that happens. Do they then have to refund the money for those who paid for the full self-driving? It's a mystery.
Well, it's gonna bedevil him for the next few months, and he's got a lot of other things in the works. So it'll be interesting to see what they do, if they settle, if they take the shot on a class action suit. Uh, yeah, it's a pickle, and I don't see an easy way out of that one. When you make a commitment like that, you got to live up to it, or you get the reputation. If he doesn't, he gets the reputation as a con man.
I agree. And this is something, it's interesting. On April 22nd, as you and I talked, 7 years ago to the day, Musk talked about full self-driving. It's around the corner. We'll have a fleet. You'll be able to make money on the cars you own. None of that has come to fruition. And I've always wondered when this comes back to bite Elon Musk. I don't know how much this will, but it seems like you say, there are a lot of things he's juggling right now. And while some are very positive, the pending SpaceX IPO, there's some that are negative, and there are some very angry Tesla owners out there who are wondering what's next and if they will ever be made good on the money they spent.
Well, my sense is his reputation has been teetering on the edge of being, called somebody who promises big and doesn't deliver. And this would be the ultimate case. I would think that it would be a trust problem from now on if he doesn't come through.
Right. But we don't exactly know what coming through means at this point. And we are years and years into promises that have not been kept, at least in terms of dates that have not been met.
Now, he's going to shift the Fremont plant to taxis. Is that the
Some
plan?
of it,
Yeah.
some of the lines, right, that we're making Model S's and Model X's because those two cars have been discontinued. So
Right.
some of the lines that were used to make those cars will be used for robotics and autonomous vehicles. Yes.
Okay. Meta, Facebook, laying off 8,000 more people. That's a lot of people, and they've been laying off people for what, 3 years now, in bits and bytes.
Yeah, the two things that are cited, and Meta, even in its release when it announced the layoffs today, said, well, because the money's going elsewhere, and that's likely AI. But
Yeah.
also, they had hired a lot for the metaverse, and Mark Zuckerberg has all but pulled the plug on that. And not only did tens of billions of dollars go into that, but a lot of person power, a lot of people power went into working on that. And so I imagine a lot of those jobs have been lost, unless if you're on the metaverse side, you can show that you deserve to be on the AI side. That's something that I think a lot of companies, a lot of employees are dealing with right now.
Now, a lot of companies, a lot of the big companies, the big five or six or whatever it is now, they all seem to be claiming it. And I'm reading articles, angry articles about this, that they're blaming the layoffs always on, well, AI. We're going to replace everybody, the middle management, with AI, and that's why we're doing this. How much is that, and how much of it is data centers and building giant, server farms, and with these huge investments of billions and billions of dollars?
I mean, I think it's of a piece because, right, the AI spending that is likely costing jobs, costing humans jobs, is going to data centers and server farms and things like that because there's so much power and energy needed to power up this agentic AI that is so the rage right now. And it is costing jobs, not just because, and you bring up an interesting point, Mike, because people were thinking, oh, the AI bots will do our jobs and make us obsolete. But it's also the money, the capex that these companies are spending. It's going towards the data centers and things like that, all the capex that AI sucks up that is not going to pay workers. So you can sort of see jobs being lost in a couple of different ways for the same end, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Now, Microsoft is also laying off people, but they seem to be doing a little bit nicer. They're like doing golden parachutes, I understand. So that's kind of a more benign way of ending your life, ending your career. But at least they're doing something like that. But
Yeah, they're calling it buyouts. I don't know in the tech industry what that means because some of these tech companies that have layoffs offer good severance packages, et cetera. Microsoft calling it buyouts versus Meta calling it layoffs, we don't really know how well those employees are being treated. But buyout is a much more thoughtful, softer way of saying we're making it worth your while, at least financially, to step aside, I guess.
yeah. Okay. And finally, on this the quick news, Intel is having a really good week. And they say that their foundries are doing, bang up business these days. We've talked about this before, but this is really quite the turnaround for Intel.
I mean, yeah, it's been an incredible turnaround. And I did the math prior to talking to you. So again, you and I talking Thursday night. Intel earnings came out just hours ago. They were boffo, and the stock is way up after hours. So
I like
less
Bafo.
than a,
I like Bafo. That's a variety
feel
term.
free,
Bafo box office.
feel free. Yeah. So less than a year ago, the Trump administration, you may remember, bought up 433 million shares of Intel. They bought it at $20 a share. In after hours trading tonight, the stock hit 79, $80. Less than a year, it has gone from 20 to 80. That is an incredible investment on a company. This whole thing started because Trump was criticizing Intel and its new CEO. And then they made friends. And the next thing you know, Intel stock price is up triple. So there you
Well,
go.
you think about it, Intel is the only other company besides Taiwan Semiconductor that can get to that small geometry on chips.
Right.
And so it's like a twofer. You get state of the art, but you also get to look good to the administration, and that can't hurt.
No, and boy, the ripple effect of this, AMD seeing all-time highs, certainly the Broadcoms of the world, the chip industry, the chip equipment makers, we talked about them last week, are just soaring as well. This is an industry that is powering the AI revolution and getting paid to do so.
Well, I hope they keep it up. It well, let's get to the big story, which this week is Tim Cook. Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple, has decided to step down and become executive chairman of Apple Computer. Now, I think he may be remembered. I mean, he took a big company, but not that big in retrospect. Putting in perspective, Apple was what? It was several hundred billion when Steve Jobs stepped down. Now it's a $4 trillion company. And, Cook only took over 10 years ago, roughly 10 years ago. That's 10 years to grow to become one of the biggest companies in history. And you got to credit him. I mean, his title was CEO, but I've always thought of him as one of the great COOs. That even as CEO, he behaved like a chief operating officer. He made the trains run on time. He hit the product, for the most part, he hit the product deadlines. He kept things moving forward. He worked on efficiency. He extended the company around the world. I mean, there were a few, well, China was a big decision and it paid well until recently. But that was a brilliant choice, too, of going over to the Far East and really manufacturing over there and saving money. I mean, everything he did was sure-footed. I mean, if there was any knock on him, and it's not that big of a knock because he did finish Steve's projects like the watch, but and the earpods and a couple other things, but he turned those into monster markets. His ability was not to come up with genius ideas, and arguably, he never came up with a earth-shaking new product. But he did perfect and then continue to perfect and advance every single product. I mean, Apple spent the 2000s changing the world, and then Cook consolidated all that and made it into a machine. And boy, that's an achievement that doesn't get recognized enough.
I agree. Steve Jobs certainly earns the title as master showman and creator of these things, along with Johnny Ive. And there's just no other way to say it. What he did in introducing those products was revolutionary. And on the stock market, it was worth $350 billion in value. What Tim Cook did, not as a master showman, but as a master salesman, was to get those products everywhere all at once. And that, it turned out, was worth $3.7 trillion. And there's a big difference there. And you need them both. I mean, you need the guy to set it up and then the guy to knock it down. And if Steve Jobs had lived another 20 years, which would have been wonderful, he would have been wise to say, now we've got these great products, Tim Cook, I want you to put them everywhere. I want you to sell them and do the supply chain work and all that. And that may have happened had things turned out differently. But the fact that they made Tim Cook a Southern gentleman who, I got to know him, was shy, certainly not all that comfortable on stage, but was really, really good with how to get things in people's hands, and perhaps the best ever.
And most people don't realize it, but he was the last of the great Silicon Valley leaders who began from a blue-collar household. I think his dad was a stevedore or worked at the docks or something down in the South. And so he came up like Noyce and Grove and Moore and, Hewlett and all those guys. They had strong principles and a healthy beginning. And they weren't members of the elite, like most of the Valley leaders now. They began poor and worked their way up and earned every bit of this. And, you know, Steve Cook never seemed to wear his success on his sleeve.
Right.
Did I say Steve Cook? Tim Cook. Yeah.
Or Tim Apple, either one.
Yeah, I grew up with a guy named Steve Cook, and I always, yeah. No, he really was competent, and the essence of competence, and he made Apple into the embodiment of competence. You knew when you're getting something from Apple, it was going to work, it was going to be good, and it was going to be leading edge, and it was going to be upgraded to the next leading edge. And he managed to continue that for 10 years. The only knock on him, I think, that you could come up with, and like I said, it wasn't that big one. He wasn't an innovator. He was never going to come up with the iPhone. Even the watch, he perfected Steve's original vision. But who cares if you revolutionize a product incrementally over the course of a decade? And he did that to every single Apple product.
Yeah, and clearly the design team was there for most of the time. He still had Johnny Ive, and it really worked out well. I mean, for my money, the earpods are two of the most important things we have. And they will only continue to innovate and get better and get more important and convenient in our lives. So I think he made his point in that arena. But really, he was the master salesman, and he certainly is a large part of the reason that Apple is as big as it is. Remember, it wasn't all that long ago that you knew people who had Apple products, and they were proud to be the 5%, right? And that's almost quaint now. After 15 years of Tim Cook's leadership, Apple is the leader in just about all these categories. And obviously, these products are ubiquitous, and they are now, you almost don't see a movie made without an iPhone because we use them all the time, and they're now plot devices as well. It's just incredible.
As a measure of his character, his exit quote was, "It has been the greatest privilege of my life to be the CEO of Apple and to have been trusted to lead such an extraordinary company." That's pretty humble. You know, I mean, that's exactly what he's like. Okay, so he's being replaced now as CEO by John Hurnes, who, if I remember right, was the senior vice president of hardware engineering.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
Do you see a turn in the company?
A little bit. I do.
Are they going to be more hardware oriented again? I mean, they're already hardware.
They're already hardware and services, but I wonder if this isn't a lean into a little more hardware, perhaps. Hardware and engineering, that's where you find the innovation. Apple, we are told, is likely to come out with one of those, folding phones, which you don't see all that much. But Apple doesn't do things to be niche products. So
that's
whatever
this summer, right? This summer?
Possibly. Who knows? The iPhones usually come out in September, October. So I don't know. But anything can happen. You have new leadership, maybe a new schedule of releases. But the idea that Apple is the delivery system for everything in the AI world, everything that people are trying to do app-wise, makes sense because all those companies are spending all the R&D money and infrastructure and CapEx money on their ideas. And then Apple, bam, they're the delivery system. And nobody has ever done it better. And it makes sense to lean into that with hardware and engineering.
The challenge, I think, to Turnus, as everybody's saying, is can Apple finally make a presence in AI?
Right. And it can, and I think it will, by cutting deals with companies like Google. I mean, think about this. Apple gets to be the delivery system for AI. That's a pretty big thing in a world obsessed with AI. And did it have to spend tens of billions of dollars on research and CapEx? No, it just had to cut a deal to be the delivery system for companies like Google.
Yeah, and I think in retrospect, it looks pretty smart what Cook did.
I agree.
That not jumping into it, not getting into the fist fight, designing new chips and new platforms and all that. He's letting letting the dust settle, and then he steps in and he picks the winner and says, "Okay, do we put it on the Mac? We put it on the phone?" I
Yeah.
mean, it
And
looks like a beautiful plan.
right. And a couple of things about that. One, Apple has been wildly successful, not necessarily by innovating, but by making something better that already exists.
Yep.
But two, the AI world, I think, is still pretty nascent. So we may see other companies, including Apple, decide we have to make the chips and the software stack on our own and whatever. That has been done by even Apple. They didn't used to make their own chips under Tim Cook. They made some
Right.
very, very powerful chips that made them a lot of money. So anything can change, but so far, I think Apple has, by shutting out the critics, played this right and kept a lot of money in the bank and avoided these, layoffs and ups and downs,
Yeah.
that we're seeing in the AI world.
Yeah, and bad blood and angry fired
Right.
employees and all that. I mean, Apple right now looks like the stablest employer in tech. I mean, that's and they're a giant company, and I think when they make their move, you're going to know it because the Earth's going to move. With
Or
that
maybe
kind
it'll
of
be a subtle
with
move.
with that kind of money, oh yeah, it can't be subtle. It's going to be like a Sherman tank rolling by, and that'll be interesting to see because I think people, if they put Google AI or another companies on the Apple platform, everyone's going to migrate to it because it has such a trustworthy. The company has built a trustworthy image over 50 years, and you can't beat that.
Right. And so they seem to be playing it right. They're reaching for the right partners. And isn't AI right now just a series of companies investing in each other and partnering up? And Apple
Yeah.
is just sort of sitting back. They have the most money, but they're not spending the most money. And that makes them fiscally responsible, as well as, a company with a $4 trillion market value. So it seems to be going well. And I imagine that Apple has vetted John Turner's mind. We don't know as much as Apple certainly does about Turnus, but you got to trust him to know what's going on. I mean, think about all the CEO transitions in the past. It's usually because somebody has gotten fired and things are bad, or obviously the loss of Steve Jobs. This time, it's a guy like Tim Cook going out on top. Apple's a $4 trillion company. It rules the world in so many ways. And he's saying, let's do this on our terms. And that, I think, is important for the future and for John Turnus himself.
Yeah, well, it doesn't create fear in customers.
Right.
It was the smoothest transition possible.
I
I
agree.
mean, apparently the markets didn't even expect it, but they didn't overreact, and
Correct.
and that's a great thing for the shareholders too.
I
So
agree.
I'm looking forward to see what Turnus does. He's young, he's got a reputation, but now he's got to really play in the big leagues and really establish his reputation. I wish him luck. I've never really been an Apple fan, but I'm working on my Apple. I have two Apple computers now, so I've become a loyalist too in a weird way. I'm always wary, but I can't deny this is a truly great company. So, and with that note, we'll see you next week, folks. You can always catch Scott on NBC Bay Area, Meta, Google X, and here. So we'll see you next week. Have a good one. Bye bye.